Welcome to Dad's Revenge, where quiet men prove that patience is a strength. Each story here is about a father who is underestimated, disrespected, or betrayed by the very people who should be protecting him, and how that father finds his own way to mend things. Welcome to today's story. The night I found my son sleeping behind my restaurant, my little granddaughter shivered in the back seat, wrapped in a tablecloth. It was one of my tablecloths, red and white checks, the kind I put out on Sundays when the church crowd comes in after service. She had it pulled up to her chin, and her breath came out in small white clouds in the cold. I stood there in the gravel lot behind Montoya's pit with my keys still in my hand, and for a long moment I could not make my body move. It was almost midnight. I had come back to bank the coals the way I do every night, the way my father did, the way his father did before him. 50 years of banking the same fire. I know the sound of that lot in the dark, the way you know the breathing of someone you love. The tick of the smoker cooling, the wind through the pines past the fence line. But that night, there was another sound underneath it all. An engine running low and rough, coughing like a sick animal that had crawled off somewhere to die. Maxton's truck, my son's truck, parked in the far corner near the woodpile, tucked back where the security light does not reach. I walked over slow. My knees do not let me walk any other way anymore. Through the windshield, I could see him behind the wheel, chin dropped to his chest, an old canvas coat thrown over him like a blanket. And in the back, my Nyla, 6 years old, sleeping in the cold in a tablecloth because her daddy had nowhere else on this earth to take her. I knocked on the glass, 2 knuckles, harder than I meant to. Maxton came awake like a man surfacing from deep water. His head jerked up. His eyes swam around lost until they found me standing there in the dark. And then I watched something move across his face that I will carry with me to my grave. It was shame. Pure and total shame, the kind that hollows a man out from the inside. He rolled the window down a few inches. The smell came out with the warm air. Old coffee, unwashed clothes, and unwashed bodies. Fear has a smell, I have learned. It was thick in that truck. "Dad," he said. His voice was a dry scrape like a boot heel on gravel. "Open the door," I told him. I did not raise my voice. I have learned across 70 years that a man does not need to shout to be obeyed. My grandfather taught me that. He used to say the quietest voice in the room is often the one holding the most fire. He opened the door. The dome light came on weak and yellow, and I saw my boy clear for the first time in 3 weeks. He had lost weight he did not have to lose. His cheeks had caved in on themselves. There was a tremble in his hands gripping that wheel that had not been there at Thanksgiving. I have cooked for this town for 50 years, weddings and funerals. I know smoke the way some men know scripture, and I know my own son better than I know anything on God's earth. And I am telling you, the man in that truck was not the man I raised. "Where is the money, Maxton?" I asked. He flinched like I had struck him across the mouth. I did not want to ask it that way. But I have never been a man who could hold a thing back once it needed saying. Holding back is what got my Erin buried before her time. "The money," I said again, softer now. "The loan you took against the building. The money my grandfather dug out of red Texas dirt with a borrowed shovel and 2 bleeding hands. Where did it go, son?" In the back seat, Nyla stirred. She murmured something small and wordless in her sleep, and pulled the tablecloth tighter around her thin shoulders. My heart, which had gone hard as a fire brick the moment I saw that truck, cracked clean down the middle at the sound of it. Maxton looked at his daughter in the mirror. Then he looked down at his own 2 hands. And then my son, 36 years old, a grown man with a child of his own, put his face into those hands and wept. "It's gone, Dad," he said. "It's all gone." "Gone where?" He shook his head. He could not get the words out. He tried twice and failed, and each time the sound that tore out of him was worse than the one before. A grown man crying like that is a terrible thing to stand near. It is a far worse thing when he is your only son. Finally, he lifted his head. His eyes were red and wet, and lost the eyes of a man who no longer trusts his own mind. "Anaya," he whispered. That was all. Just her name. His wife's name spoken like a confession in a dark church. Like the name of a sickness that had been eating him alive from the inside. The wind came through the pines again. Somewhere out on the highway, a truck downshifted and faded off toward Louisiana. I stood in that gravel lot I have walked 10,000 times, and I felt the years fall away from me like ash off a cold grate. I felt the old thing wake up in my chest, the thing I thought I had buried right alongside my wife 2 years back. The thing that does not care one bit about my bad knees or my 70 years. Rage. Cold and clean and patient as a low fire. I have spent my whole life learning to wait. Low and slow, my grandfather told me, standing over that first pit. Good things cannot be rushed. Patience is a kind of strength. I built everything I ever owned on that single word. My business, my good name, the respect of every living soul in this county who has ever pulled a chair up to one of my tables. But there is a difference between patience and standing still while wolves come in the night and eat your family alive. I had been still too long. I had been still once before when my Erin first got sick, telling myself we would see the doctor next week, and then the next week, until one morning there were no more next weeks left for her at all. I swore over the fresh dirt of her grave that I would never be still like that again. I looked at my grandbaby asleep in a tablecloth in the cold. I looked at my son broken behind the wheel of a dying truck, and I made my choice right there in the dark. "Get up," I said. Maxton blinked up at me. "Dad, get your daughter. Get whatever you've got in this truck that matters to you. You are not sleeping in a parking lot. Not while I have got breath in my body and a warm bed sitting empty under my roof." "You don't understand." His voice broke apart. "Anaya, she has papers, Dad. She has a lawyer. She's been telling people terrible things about me. If I come anywhere near that house, they'll call the police. I do not care what she has." I leaned down close so he could see my face in that weak dome light, so he could see that the old man he thought had gone soft was still in there under the years, still burning. "You listen to me now. Tonight you sleep in a warm bed and my granddaughter eats a hot meal at my table. Tomorrow we find out exactly what that woman took from this family." I reached into that cold truck and gently, so very gently, I lifted the corner of the tablecloth away from Nyla's sleeping face. She had my Erin's stubborn chin. "And then," I said, "we are going to take every last bit of it back." The drive home takes 11 minutes. I have made it 10,000 times, and I could make it with my eyes closed. That night, it felt like 11 years. Maxton rode beside me in the cab of my old truck, staring out the window at the dark shapes of the pines rolling past. Nyla slept in his lap, still wrapped in that tablecloth, her small face pressed against his chest. Neither of us spoke. Some silences are empty. This one was full to the brim with everything we did not yet have the words to say. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind wandered back the way an old man's mind does, back to my grandfather. He was the one who dug the first pit in 1946 on a piece of land nobody else wanted, out past where the paved road ended. He came home from the war with a bad leg and $40 and a recipe that lived only in his head. The bank would not lend a black man a dime in those days, so he did not ask. He borrowed a shovel from a neighbor, and he dug that pit himself, one blister at a time, in the red Texas clay. He used to hold up his hands to me when I was a boy. The palms were a map of old scars. "This is the loan," he would say. "This is the only bank that ever said yes to us. Your 2 hands and the good Lord's patience. Everything we have came out of that ground, Patrick. Nobody gave it. We dug it." I built my whole life on the back of that story. I added the brick building in 1978. I added the second smoker, the dining room, the sign out front, with our name on it in letters tall enough to read from the highway. 50 years of low and slow. 50 years of waking before the sun to feed people who became like family. And now some woman I had welcomed to my table, some woman I had prayed for and passed the collection plate beside, had taken a loan against that building, against my grandfather's blistered hands. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles ached. We pulled into my drive. The porch light was on, the way I leave it every night, out of a habit I never broke after Erin passed. The house sat there warm and yellow against the dark, and I felt Maxton let out a long breath beside me like a man who had been holding it for 3 weeks. I carried Nyla in myself. My knees screamed the whole way up the porch steps, but I would not have handed that child to anyone. She stirred once, opened her eyes halfway, and looked up at me. "Grandpa," she whispered. "I've got you, baby," I said. "You're home now. Go on back to sleep." She did. Just like that. She trusted me that completely, and it near about broke me. I laid her down in the spare room, the one that used to be Maxton's when he was a boy. The same quilt was still on the bed, the one Aaron stitched the winter she was carrying him. I pulled it up over Nyla's shoulders and stood there a moment in the dark, listening to her breathe. 6 years old. She should have been dreaming about nothing worse than what toy she wanted. Instead, she had been sleeping in a parking lot. When I came back out, Maxton was standing in the middle of my kitchen like a man who no longer knew where he belonged in the world. He looked at the stove. He looked at his mother's canisters still lined up on the counter where she left them. He looked everywhere but at me. "Sit down," I told him. "I'll heat up some stew." "I'm not hungry, Dad." "I did not ask if you were hungry." He sat. While the pot warmed on the stove, I told him I was going back out to his truck to get their things. He started to rise to say he would do it, but I put a hand on his shoulder and pressed him back down into the chair. His collarbone felt sharp under my palm. Too sharp. It was the same sharpness I had felt in Aaron's shoulder near the end when the weight fell off her so fast and my stomach turned over cold at the memory. But I did not say that. Some things a father keeps behind his teeth. I just told him to eat when it was ready, and I went back out into the night. His truck was a sad thing to go through. A whole life crammed into a back seat. Trash bags of clothes, a booster seat, a coloring book gone soft from the damp. I gathered what mattered and left the rest, and that was when I found it. It had rolled up under the passenger seat, half hidden by a fast food wrapper. A small amber pill bottle, the kind the pharmacy hands out. It was empty, the cap was gone, and the label had been peeled off, but not all the way. Somebody had started to scrape it clean and given up, so a torn corner still clung to the plastic. I turned it toward the security light and squinted my old eyes at it. I could make out only 3 things: a partial name I did not recognize, a dosage, and one word, printed clear, that meant nothing to me in that moment, but would come to mean everything. I stood there in the cold, turning that little bottle over in my fingers. Maxton had never been a man for pills. Even as a boy, he would spit out an aspirin. Something about that empty bottle sat wrong in me, the way a note sits wrong in a hymn you have sung your whole life. I could not have told you why. I slipped it into my coat pocket. I did not know what it was. I only knew, the way you know weather is coming before you see the clouds, that I was meant to keep it. Back inside, Maxton had eaten half the bowl. That was something. Color was coming back into his face just a little. I poured myself a cup of coffee I did not intend to drink and sat down across from him at the table where he had learned to do his sums. "Talk to me," I said. "From the start, not the money, not the lawyer. Tell me how a healthy man ends up sleeping in a parking lot thinking he's losing his mind." He wrapped both hands around his bowl like he was cold clear through. "That's just it, Dad," he said, and his voice had a crack running through the middle of it. "For 2 years, I thought I was sick. Anaya told me I was sick. The doctor she took me to told me I was sick." He looked up at me, and there was something in his eyes worse than fear. It was doubt. Doubt in his own mind. I believed them. I thought I was going crazy. He set the bowl down. His hands were shaking again. "But sitting here in your kitchen, with the fog starting to lift for the first time in months," he swallowed hard. "Dad, I don't think I was ever sick at all. And that scares me more than anything. Because if I wasn't sick, then what was happening to me?" I did not answer him right away. A man asks a question like that, you do not rush to fill the silence. You let him find his own way to the rest of it. I got up and poured the coffee down the sink. The smell of it seemed to bother him, though I could not have said why yet. I set a glass of water in front of him instead. "Start with the mornings," I said. "You said the fog. When did the fog start?" Maxton stared into the water like it might show him something. "About 2 years ago," he said, "right after we opened the second location downtown. She started making my coffee every morning. Said she'd found a special blend, something for focus, because I was working so hard on the expansion." He gave a small broken laugh. I thought it was sweet, my wife taking care of me. He turned the glass in a slow circle. I'd drink it, and 30-40 minutes later, the world would go soft at the edges. I'd lose whole afternoons. I'd sit down at my desk to go over the books and look up, and it was dark outside, and I couldn't remember a single thing I'd done. I forgot conversations. I forgot to pick Nyla up from school one time, Dad. My own daughter sitting on the curb waiting for me. Anaya had to go get her. His jaw worked. She made sure everybody knew about that one. I kept my face still, but in my coat pocket, that empty pill bottle had begun to feel heavy as a brick.
Go on, I said. It wasn't just the coffee. It got into everything, dinner especially.
He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. She started cooking every night, big, elaborate meals. She'd plate mine special, said I needed the extra iron, the extra whatever. And after dinner was always the worst. That's when it would come on strong. I'd get confused, angry sometimes, over nothing. Or I'd just drop, like somebody cut a string.
He lowered his hands and looked at me, and his eyes were wet.
And she filmed it, Dad. That's the part I can't. His voice failed. He breathed. She'd have her phone out. Later, she'd show me the videos. Me ranting at the wall. Me crying on the kitchen floor. Me not making any sense. And she'd hold my hand and say, "Real gentle, baby. You're getting worse. We have to do something." I'm so scared for the children. And I believed her. What else was I supposed to think? I was watching it with my own eyes.
I have sat with grief my whole life. I have carried caskets for half this county. But I am not sure I have ever felt a cold as deep as the one that went through me at that table. Because I understood all at once what I was hearing. This was not a sickness that came for my son. This was a thing that was done to him. Slow, patient, meal by meal. By his own wife, in his own kitchen, over his own dinner table. The dinner table. The one place a family is supposed to be safe. I reached into my coat pocket. I set the empty amber bottle down on the kitchen table between us, next to his water glass. It made a small click against the wood. Maxton went still.
"Where did you get that?" "Under the passenger seat of your truck," I said. "You know what it is." He picked it up with 2 fingers, like it might bite him. He turned it toward the light the way I had, and I watched the blood drain out of his face. "I've never seen this bottle in my life," he whispered. "This isn't mine. Dad, I don't take anything." "The label's been scraped off," I said. "Somebody didn't want it read, but they missed a corner." I did not know the word on it yet. I did not know it was a drug they give to men who hear voices that are not there. But I knew the shape of a thing hidden. I have known that shape my whole life. We're going to find out exactly what that is. He set the bottle down and pushed it away from him across the table.
That was when Nyla appeared in the kitchen doorway.
She had woken up the way children do in a strange house and come padding out in her socks looking for her daddy. She stood there rubbing one eye, the quilt lines still pressed into her cheek. And she looked at that little amber bottle sitting on the table, and something crossed her small face. Recognition. "Daddy has to take his medicine," she said softly, reciting it the way a child repeats a thing they have been told many times. "Mama makes it special," she said. The little girl frowned, working to get it right. She said, "Don't eat what Mama cooks for Daddy. It's only his. It'll make me sleepy."
The kitchen went so quiet I could hear the clock over the stove.
Maxton made a sound I will not try to describe. He pulled his daughter into his arms and held her, and over the top of her head, he looked at me, and there were no words left in either of us. A 6-year-old had just told us plain as day that her mother had taught her to stay away from the poison she was feeding her father. Taught her like a household rule. Like wiping your feet at the door. I stood up from that table. I had to. My hands wanted to break something, and there was nothing in that kitchen I was willing to break. So I walked to the window over the sink, and I stood there, and I looked out into the dark toward the pines, and I made myself breathe. Slow. In and out. The way I breathe when a fire wants to jump the line, and I have to hold it steady. Somewhere behind me, Nyla asked if she could have some water, and Maxton got it for her, his voice gone soft and careful again for her sake. Good. A child should not carry the weight of what she had just set down on that table. I do not know how long I stood there. Long enough for the rage to bank down into something colder and more useful. Long enough to start in the back of my mind to build. Then the phone rang. Not my cell, the old landline on the wall. The one almost nobody has the number to anymore. It rang loud in that silent house, and I knew before I crossed the floor that a call at this hour was never good news. I picked it up. Montoya. Patrick. It was Marshall McKay, my oldest friend and the best lawyer this county ever produced before he hung up his shingle. His voice was tight in a way I had not heard in years. "I've been trying your cell. Listen to me. I made some calls tonight like you asked, about your daughter-in-law." He paused and I heard him breathe. "It's worse than we thought. They already filed, Patrick, this afternoon, 4:59, right before the courthouse closed." My hand tightened on the receiver. "Filed what?" "An emergency petition, and you need to sit down for the rest of it." I sat down, not because Marshall told me to, but because my legs had their own opinion about the next thing he was going to say. "Tell me," I said. "It's a petition for emergency guardianship," Marshall said. "Over Maxton. She's asking the court to declare him mentally incompetent and hand her full control. His person, his medical decisions, what's left of his finances, all of it." "On what grounds?" "Rapid onset psychosis. She's got a stack of exhibits an inch thick, Patrick. Videos, affidavits, a letter from some doctor saying he's been deteriorating for 2 years and represents a danger to himself and his children." A pause. "And there's more. She filed a companion motion for sole custody of Nyla. She's telling the court that Maxton took the child from the family home in the middle of a psychotic break, that the little girl is with him right now in danger." I looked across the kitchen at my son holding his sleeping daughter against his shoulder. This man who could not have hurt a soul if his own life hung on it. "That's a lie," I said. "Every word of it." "I know that, you know that. But here's what you have to understand about an emergency filing." Marshall's voice dropped careful, the way a man talks when he needs you to hear each word land. "The judge doesn't hear both sides, not at first. There's a hearing set for Thursday morning. That's 48 hours from now. If the judge looks at her exhibits and grants that petition before we can answer it, then it is over. Maxton loses the right to hire his own lawyer. He loses control of his money. He loses his daughter. And she gains the legal power to have him committed to a facility. 48 hours. I have heard a lot of clocks start ticking in my life. The timer on a brisket that has to come off at the right minute or the whole thing is ruined. The clock in a hospital hallway. But I had never, in my 70 years, heard one as loud as the one that started up in my chest right then, because I had heard a number like that before. 2 years back, a doctor had stood in front of me with his hands folded and told me that if we had brought Aaron in a few months sooner, they might have caught it. A few months. I had traded my wife's life for the comfort of telling myself there was no rush, that we would go when it was convenient, that patience was always the wise choice. I would not make that trade again, not with my son. "Marshall," I said, "I need you at my house at 6 in the morning, and I need you to bring me some people." "What kind of people?" "The kind who win." I stood up and started to pace, and the pacing felt good, felt like doing something. "First, I need a doctor, not one of hers, a real one. A forensic toxicologist, somebody who can testify in a courtroom and make it stick. I've got an empty pill bottle here with the label scraped off, and I've got a son who's been drugged for 2 years. I want his blood tested. I want his hair tested. I hear you can go back months in a strand of hair." "You can," Marshall said slowly. "Hair holds a record, grows about half an inch a month, and whatever's in the blood gets locked into it. A long enough strand is a calendar. I know a woman at the state lab, Diana Gill, best in Texas. If there's something in that boy, she'll find it, and she'll be able to say exactly when it went in." "Get her." "Patrick, a rush forensic panel expedited. That's expensive." I did not ask what it cost. I stopped pacing. "Who else? I need somebody who can follow money. She took a loan against my building. She moved $150,000 of my son's business capital. I want to know where every dollar of it went, and I want it before Thursday." Sullivan Fletcher Marshall said without hesitating. "Forensic accountant. Used to chase fraud for the government. Cold as a January well and twice as deep. If she buried that money, he'll dig it up." "Then that's my crew." I looked at the clock over the stove. It was nearly 1 in the morning. 6 a.m., my kitchen, all of them. There was a silence on the line. Then Marshall said gentler, "Patrick, I have to ask you something as your friend and not your lawyer. You've spent 50 years being the most patient man I know. Low and slow, that's your whole gospel. You sure you want to come at this fast and hard? Because once we move, there's no easing back.
I looked at that pill bottle on my table. I looked at my son.
Marshall, I said, you know what a fire does when you leave it low and slow and walk away for too long. I did not wait for him to answer. It goes out, and then you've got nothing but cold ash and a family that goes hungry. I have spent my whole life feeding people slow because slow was the right way to feed them. But there is a time to bank a fire and a time to open the vents and let it roar. My boy does not have the luxury of my patience anymore.
My voice came out low and even and final. This time, we lighted up.
All right, Marshall said quietly. 6 a.m. Get some rest if you can. I hung up the phone. I stood in my quiet kitchen with my drugged son and my sleeping grandbaby and an empty bottle that held the proof of somebody's cruelty. Then I did the only thing that has ever calmed my hands when my heart was on fire. I went out to the smoker.
The night air bit at me, but I welcomed it.
I opened the firebox and looked at the coals I had come home to bank hours before, back when my biggest concern was a good night's sleep. They had burned down low and orange, glowing soft under a skin of gray ash. Patient. Waiting. I took a length of split oak from the pile and I laid it on. Then another. I opened the vents wide, all the way I almost never do, and I stood there in the cold and watched the fire find the new wood and climb. Watched it wake up. Watched the low, patient orange turn to something taller and hungrier, throwing real light out across the dark yard, across the pines, across 50 years of everything my family had built out of Texas dirt.
My grandfather used to say, a fire tells you the truth about a man,
whether he tends it or whether he lets it die. I had let too many things die by waiting. Not this. Not my boy. Come Thursday, I thought they were going to learn the difference between a man who has forgotten how to burn and a man who simply chose for a long and peaceful while not to. I let the fire roar until the sky started going gray at the edges. Then I went inside to wait for my crew. My crew came at 6, the way good people do when a man they respect asks them to. Marshall first, in a suit that had seen 30 years of courtrooms. Then a lean man with gray skin and eyes that did not smile, carrying a battered leather satchel. That was Sullivan Fletcher, the money man. And last, a small woman with steel in her spine and a hard plastic case in each hand. Diana Gill. I had coffee on and biscuits in the oven, because I am a Montoya, and a Montoya feeds people even in the middle of a war.
We sat around the same kitchen table where my son had confessed his nightmare 6 hours before.
Maxton sat with us, pale but steadier, a man beginning to believe he was not crazy after all. That belief is a fragile thing. I watched it grow in him like a coal catching. Diana got to work first. She was gentle with Maxton, gentler than her face let on. She drew his blood into 3 small vials, one after another, labeling each. Then she took a pair of surgical scissors and cut a lock of his hair close to the scalp near the back where it would not show. "Hair is honest," she said, holding the strand up to the window light. "Blood tells me what's in you today. But this," she coiled it into a paper envelope, "this tells me what's been in you for the last 2 years. Month by month. It cannot lie, and it cannot be coached. If somebody has been dosing this young man, I will know what, and I will know when it started, down to the week." She sealed the envelope. "Give me until tomorrow morning." Sullivan said almost nothing. He opened his satchel, took out a laptop and a legal pad, and asked Maxton 3 quiet questions about the loan and the business accounts. Then he began to write. He wrote the whole time in a small, tight hand and did not look up. Marshall leaned over to me and murmured, "Don't let the quiet fool you. He can read a bank statement like other men read a face. If she left a trail, he's already on it." I felt for the first time since I had knocked on that truck window something like hope. I had a doctor who could prove the poison, a money man who could follow the theft, a lawyer who could put it all before a judge. We had 48 hours, but we had a plan, and I have never in my life feared hard work when I had a plan. That was the moment my granddaughter screamed. It came from the spare room, high and sharp and wrong. I was on my feet before I knew I had stood, my bad knees be damned. I got to the doorway just as Maxton shoved past me. Nyla was on the floor beside the bed. She had gotten up, and she had gone down. Her small body was rigid, then loose, and her eyes had rolled back to show the whites, and her lips had a bluish cast that put a fear in me I had not felt since I watched my Aaron fall in our kitchen 2 years ago and never truly get up again.
"Baby," Maxton was saying, "baby, Daddy's here. Daddy's here."
Diana was there in an instant, calm as still water, on her knees beside the child. She had 2 fingers on Nyla's throat. "She's got a pulse. It's fast. She's breathing. Get her on her side. How long has she been running warm?" "I don't." Maxton's voice cracked wide open. "She felt hot last night. I thought it was just... "Call it in," Diana said to me, and I already had the phone in my hand. The next hour I will not draw out. Some things a man does not put words to, only lives through. The ambulance on my gravel drive with its lights turning the pines red and blue. The ride to the county hospital with Maxton holding his daughter's hand and whispering to her the whole way. The white hallway. The waiting.
I have sat in a hallway like that before.
The same fear tastes the same, no matter how many years pass. I stood against the wall with my old hands folded, and I made myself breathe slow, and I prayed the only prayer I have ever really known, which is, "Lord, not this one. Not this one too." A doctor came out after a long while, young, tired, but his face was not the face they wear when the news is the worst kind, and I let out a breath I had been holding since the scream. "She's stable," he said. "She spiked a high fever and had a febrile seizure. Frightening to see, but children come through them. We've got the fever down." Then his tired face folded into something careful and he looked from Maxton to me. "But I need to ask you both something. This little girl has a heart murmur, a significant one. Given her symptoms, it should have been followed by a cardiologist months ago. There's a whole workup that should have already been done." He paused. "When was the last time she saw a doctor about her heart?" Maxton stared at him. "A heart she doesn't. Nobody ever told me she had anything wrong with her heart." The young doctor frowned and checked his tablet. "That's strange. There's a referral in her chart from over a year ago. From her last pediatric visit. It was flagged as urgent." He looked up. "It was never followed. The appointments were scheduled and canceled. 3 times. I felt the floor of the world tilt under me. Somebody had known. For over a year, somebody had known that this child, this baby, needed a heart doctor, and had scheduled the appointments, and had canceled them. 3 times. While I was passing that woman the collection plate at church, while she was filming my son on her phone, I was still standing there, trying to hold the pieces of it in my 2 hands, when I heard footsteps hurry up the hallway behind me, and a woman's voice, breathless and afraid. "Mr. Montoya, is she all right? Oh Lord, please tell me she's all right." I turned. A stout woman in her 40s stood there, coat thrown on over what looked like church clothes, her face streaked with worry. I did not know her, but Maxton did. "Miss Cameron," he breathed. "I came the second I heard," she said, pressing a hand to her chest. "I still know some of the nurses here." She looked at me then, and her eyes were fierce and wet. "You're the grandfather. Patrick. I took care of that baby for 4 years, till Anaya let me go 2 weeks ago for asking too many questions." She stepped closer and lowered her voice, and there was iron under the fear in it now. "There are things going on in that house, Mr. Montoya. Things I couldn't prove and couldn't stop. But I saw them. I saw all of it." She glanced at the hospital room door, then back at me. "And there's something you need to know. Something about papers that woman signed. A long time ago, before any of this ever started." We found a quiet corner of the waiting room, away from the vending machines and the television nobody was watching. Cameron Velasquez sat down across from me and folded her hands in her lap like a woman about to give testimony in church. Maxton stayed by Nyla's door. This part he did not need to hear again. He had lived it. "Start wherever you need to," I told her. "I've got nothing but time and a bad temper, and only one of those is going to help us." She almost smiled. Then her face went grave. "I love that little girl like my own," she said. 4 years I had her, fed her, rocked her, taught her her letters, and the whole time I watched that house get colder and colder. She took a breath. At first I told myself it was none of my business. A marriage is a private thing. But then things started that a person can't unsee. Such as the dinners. Her mouth tightened. Miss Anaya would cook 2 different meals every night, one for the family and one just for Mr. Maxton, plated separate always. She'd carry his to him herself. And she told me to my face real sweet, "Don't you ever fix Mr. Maxton a plate, Cameron. He's on a special diet. I handle his food." 4 years and she never once let me cook for that man. Cameron's eyes filled. I didn't understand it then. I understand it now. I said nothing. In my coat pocket, I could still feel the ghost of that empty bottle, though it was sitting in a lab across town by now. But that's not the worst of it, Mr. Montoya. Lord forgive me, that's not even the worst. Her voice dropped so low, I had to lean in. About a year ago, that baby started getting tired. Real tired. She'd run across the yard and go gray in the lips and have to sit down. I told Miss Anaya, I said this child needs to see a doctor. Something's not right with her, and she said she'd handle it. Cameron's hands twisted together. The doctor's office called the house. I answered once. It was the heart specialist, confirming an appointment. I wrote it on the calendar myself. And 2 days later, that appointment was gone off the calendar, scratched out. I asked her about it, and she looked at me. Cameron stopped. She had to gather herself. She looked at me, and she said that specialist wants $4,000 up front, and the brand launch is in the spring. Cameron, I am not throwing money at a murmur that'll probably fix itself. The brand launch. Cameron's voice broke on the words. She chose a party over that baby's heart. 3 times she chose it, and when I kept pushing, she let me go. Said I'd gotten too attached. Too attached. She wiped her face with the flat of her hand. That child could have died on your kitchen floor last night, Mr. Montoya, over a party. I have heard evil described 100 ways from the pulpit. I never understood it until I sat in that plastic chair, because I finally saw it plain. It was not a monster with horns. It was a woman with a spreadsheet deciding a little girl's beating heart was a line item she could afford to skip. There is a place where understanding stops. I had spent the night trying to understand that woman, to make her make sense. A hard childhood maybe, some wound that twisted her. But a mother who cancels her own baby's heart doctor to pay for a party has walked out past the last streetlight of anything a decent man can understand. Out there is only the cold, and I was done trying to follow her into it. There's more, Cameron said. About the papers, but I only heard pieces through a door. She and that brother of hers, Matthias, they signed something months and months ago before Mr. Maxton ever got bad. I heard the word sale. I heard them laughing. She shook her head. That's all I've got, but it never sat right with me. If he was just getting sick on his own, why did they have papers ready before he ever got sick at all? Why indeed? It was the same crooked note I had heard in that empty pill bottle. I filed it away, and I thanked that good woman, and I made sure she had my number, and I had hers. I did not go home to sleep. I went home to cook. That is what I do. When Aaron passed, I cooked for 3 days straight and gave it all away because my hands did not know what else to do with grief. So when I got back to my empty house that morning, I built up the fire and I put on a brisket, a good one, 16 pounds. Because tending a fire is the only way I know to think. But I could not think. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Nyla Gray in the lips. I heard that woman's voice, cool as you please, a murmur that'll probably fix itself. And the fire in my chest, the one I had banked so carefully my whole life, would not bank. It roared. It jumped every line I tried to hold. I do not know how long I stood at that smoker. The sun came up over the pines. The frost burned off the grass. A cardinal landed on the fence and sang and flew off. Somewhere down the road, a school bus ground through its gears. My coffee went cold in my hand untouched, and I stood there, one hand on the cold steel of the firebox, seeing none of it, hearing none of it, gone somewhere far down inside myself, where it was very quiet and very dark. I thought of Aaron's hand in mine in that hospital hallway 2 years gone. I thought of Nyla's blue lips. 2 women I loved, and both times I had been too slow. The thought sat on my chest like a stone. When I finally came back to myself, I smelled it. Smoke. But the wrong smoke. Black and bitter and sharp. I opened the smoker. The brisket was a ruin, charred through black as a burnt stump, hard as a fire brick. 16 pounds of good beef turned to carbon. In 50 years of tending fire, 50 years weddings and funerals, and every Sunday in between, I had never once let a piece of meat burn. Not once. My grandfather could have risen up out of the ground and not believed it. I stood there and looked at that black, wasted thing, and I understood what it meant, though I did not say it out loud to the empty yard. A man who lets the fire take the meat is a man who is no longer in control of the fire. And the man who is no longer in control of his fire is a danger. To his enemies, yes, but maybe to himself, too. I closed the lid on the ruined brisket. I wiped my hands slow on my grandfather's apron, and I made myself a promise standing there in the cold morning light. I would use the fire. I would not let it use me. Whatever I did to the people who had done this to my family, I would do it cold, patient, on purpose. Then I went inside and I called Sullivan Fletcher and I asked him what the money had told him. Sullivan Fletcher did not do his talking on the telephone. He asked me to come to him. His office was 2 rooms above a tax preparer's on the courthouse square, and it smelled of old paper and cold coffee. There was a whiteboard on one wall, and by the time I got there, it was already covered corner to corner in his small, tight hand. Boxes and arrows, dollar amounts, red lines running between them like veins. Marshall was already there. Maxton had stayed at the hospital with Nyla, which was right. A man should sit with his child. This part I could carry for. "Sit down, Mr. Montoya," Sullivan said. He did not offer to shake my hand. I learned later he never does. He just picked up a marker and pointed at the top of the board. "You wanted to know where the money went. I'm going to show you. And I'll tell you now, in 30 years of doing this, it is not the sloppiest work I've ever seen, but it is close." He tapped a box marked loan. 14 months ago, your son and daughter-in-law took a loan against the restaurant building. $200,000. The signature's your son's, but the application was filled out in another hand. Hers, I'd wager, though we'd need an examiner to swear to it. He drew his marker down a red line. Same month, they refinanced the second location and pulled the equity out of that too. Another 110. Then they drained the business operating account. All told, inside of 1 year, better than $400,000 left the Montoya accounts. 400,000. I had thought it was 150. I sat very still and let the number settle into me like a stone into a pond. $400,000 is not a number to a man like me. It is ours. It is my grandfather's back bent over that first pit. It is every 4 in the morning of my life every Sunday I stood at that smoker instead of sitting in a pew. Every dollar I salted away 1 brisket at a time, so my son would never have to start from dirt the way we did. She had not stolen money from us. She had stolen the years of 3 men's lives and set fire to them for a party. "Where did it go?" I asked. That's the interesting part. Sullivan tapped a second cluster of boxes. It didn't just vanish. It moved. She layered it through 2 shell companies. Badly, I traced them in an afternoon, and it came out the other side as hard assets. A lake house up at Caddo. Purchase price, $600,000, and $40,000 more in inventory for something called, he checked his pad, the Anaya method. Yoga mats, supplements, silk robes. A launch event booked for the spring. The brand launch. The one that cost more than a little girl's heart. But here is what I want you to understand. Sullivan set the marker down and looked at me, and for the first time those cold eyes had something moving behind them. They did not have the cash to buy that lake house outright. $600,000, and they only put down 2. The rest they financed. And to get the mortgage they had to show income. Richard, he caught himself. Matthias Davila hasn't held a real job in 6 years. His sister sells vitamins on the internet. They have no verifiable income between them. So they made it up. They filed fabricated tax returns, claimed Matthias was a consultant for a firm that does not exist. Marshall leaned forward. That's mortgage fraud. Federal. That's federal bank fraud. Sullivan agreed. And it means that lake house is not standing on rock. It's standing on a lie. And a lie, Mr. Montoya, is a thing you can pull like a loose brick. I looked at that whiteboard at $400,000 of my family's blood and sweat turned into a party house and a box of yoga mats.
and I felt the cold, useful anger settle into my hands. This was better than rage. Rage burns wild. This was banked. This I could aim. Then Sullivan turned back to the board and tapped one more box off in the corner that I had not noticed. It was marked simply collateral. "There's one more thing," he said. "When they took the loan against the building, the bank wanted more than the real estate to secure it. So they put up the business's intellectual property too. The trademarks, the recipes." He looked at his notes. "There's a registered trade secret listed by name in the loan documents, filed and pledged as collateral. It's called," he squinted, "Aaron's Gold, a sauce recipe." The room went quiet. Aaron's Gold, my wife's sauce, the one she spent 30 years perfecting over that stove. The one she was still working on the week she died. The recipe card sitting on our kitchen counter in her own hand. The last line left unfinished because she ran out of time to finish it. I have never once made it sense. I could not bring myself to. That card still sits in a tin in my pantry, 3/4 written, waiting for a woman who is not coming back. And they had taken it. They had reached into the one drawer of my heart I keep locked, and they had pulled out my dead wife's last unfinished gift, and they had pledged it to a bank to buy a party house. I could see that card in my mind as clear as if I held it. Erin's slanted handwriting, the little heart she drew over the letter I in her own name, the smudge of paprika on the corner where her thumb had rested. 3 lines from the bottom, the ink just stops. She had set it down to answer the phone. She always meant to come back to it. And then there was the hospital. And then there was the ground. That unfinished line was the last thing my wife ever wrote. And to these people, it was nothing but a line item on a loan. Collateral, a thing to be pledged and sold. I did not say any of that out loud. Some things a man does not lay on a whiteboard. I just sat there, an old man in a hard chair, and felt something in me pass over from grief into something else. Something with a spine. "Mr. Montoya," Marshall said gently, "you all right?" "I'm fine," I said, and my voice came out steady, which surprised me. "Keep going, Sullivan. You said one more thing." I did. He set down the marker and crossed to a folder on his desk. He opened it and slid a single document across the table to me. "This came through an hour before you got here. I subpoenaed the records of that shell company and this fell out. I've read it 4 times, and Mr. Montoya, I need you to look at the date at the top before you read one word of what it says." I picked it up. It was an agreement of some kind, dense with the language lawyers use to hide plain meaning. My old eyes went to the date line at the top the way he told me, and the cold that went through me then had nothing to do with the season. The date at the top of that document was in September. I read it 3 times to be sure my old eyes were not playing tricks. September. Then I made myself read the rest. It was a purchase agreement. A corporation I had never heard of, one of these hospitality groups that swallows up little family places and hangs their names on a wall in a boardroom, had agreed to buy Montoya's pit. Both locations. The building my grandfather dug the foundation of. The recipes. The name. All of it for a figure that would have insulted a lesser man and did insult me. And it was signed. Anaya's name. Matthias's name as her business representative. Dated September. I set the paper down on Sullivan's desk very carefully, the way you set down something that might go off. "Marshall," I said, "when did Maxton's trouble start? The bad spells, the doctors. When did she start telling the world he was sick?" Marshall already had his file open. He knew where I was going. "The first documented incident she logged was in November," he said quietly. "The first doctor's letter is dated the week of Thanksgiving. Everything in her petition, every video, every affidavit starts in November." "November," I said. "November," Sullivan confirmed. 2 months after she signed away the business. I stood up out of that chair. I had to. I walked to the window and looked down at the courthouse square, at the ordinary people going about their ordinary morning, and I let the full shape of it come clear in my mind all at once, like a building rising up out of a fog. She did not start poisoning my son because he got sick. She got him sick because she had already sold everything out from under him, and she needed him gone before he found out. The sale came first. The sickness was manufactured to cover it.
Every spell, every video, every tear she cried in front of a judge. It was all just insulation wrapped around a theft she had already committed 2 months before my boy ever lost a single afternoon to that fog.
My son never had a chance. Not one. The marriage, the special dinners, the gentle, worried voice, all of it was a stage built board by board around a man who thought he was living a life. He had loved a woman who never existed. He had fathered a child with a spreadsheet in a dress. And I did not say that part out loud, not to Marshall, not to Sullivan, because some griefs are too heavy to hand to another man. That one I would carry myself. But I felt it lodge in me, sharp and permanent, right next to the place where I keep Aaron. For a moment I stood there and let it hurt. I thought about the wedding 4 years back, my boy in a rented tuxedo, grinning like the sun had come up just for him, and that woman on his arm in white. And me standing at the pit all day cooking for 300 guests, proud, so proud, welcoming her into my family with both hands open. I had prayed over that marriage. I had given them my blessing and my recipes, and a down payment on their first house. And the whole time, I now understood. She had been measuring the place for the sale. Then I did what my grandfather taught me to do with pain. I did not let it drown me, and I did not let it turn me loud and foolish. I put it in the fire down low, where it could not blind me, and I let it become heat. Slow heat. The kind that cooks a thing all the way through. Because here is the thing they did not understand about what they had done. In their hurry, in their greed, they had left the loose brick sticking right out of the wall. That September date was not just cruelty, it was proof. You cannot poison a man to cover a theft you have not committed yet. The dates did not lie. And a jury, a judge, a district attorney, they can all read a calendar. They got greedy, Sullivan said, watching my face. They couldn't wait. They sold it early to get their hands on the money, and then they had to scramble to justify why the owner was suddenly incompetent. The timeline is their whole case, and the timeline is a confession. It's more than that, I said, and I turned around from the window. The two of them were looking at me. It tells me who I'm dealing with. These are not patient people. Patient people would have poisoned him first, slow, gotten him declared incompetent, nice and clean, and then sold the business as his lawful guardian. That's how a careful thief does it. But they didn't have the patience for it. They wanted the money now. They sold first and lied second. I felt the corner of my mouth pull. It was not a smile. And a man who cannot wait, Marshall, a man who cannot wait can always be rushed into a mistake. Marshall set down his pen. What are you thinking, Patrick? I picked up the September contract and looked at it one more time. Then I looked at that whiteboard at the shell companies and the fraud and the lake house standing on a lot. I'm thinking about brisket, I said. Marshall blinked. Sullivan did not, but then Sullivan never did. You put a brisket on at midnight for the church lunch, I said. 14 hours low and slow, and you do not rush it because if you crank the heat to hurry it along, the outside chars to nothing, and the inside stays raw and the whole thing is ruined. Patience is the whole secret. These people, I tapped the contract. These people cranked the heat. They were in such a hurry to eat that they've cooked themselves half to ruin already. They just don't know it yet. I set the paper down. So we are not going to charge in there and hand them our evidence and give them time to lawyer up and get their story straight. No, we are going to be patient the way they never could be. We are going to let them think they've won. I could see it taking shape as I spoke it, the way a whole cook comes to you at once sometimes before you've laid the first log. They already believe I'm finished. They believe I'm just a sad old man who cooks barbecue and cries over his dead wife. Good, let them believe it. I'm going to walk into that house with my hat in my hands and my back bent, and I'm going to look every bit the fool they need me to be. A man that grief has broken. A man ready to give up. I looked at Marshall. And then when they are relaxed and fat and certain we are going to give them exactly what greedy people cannot say no to. One more thing to grab. Something too rich to pass up. And we are going to let them reach for it with both hands in writing, in front of a running tape. The office was very quiet. Down on the square, the courthouse clock struck the hour. You want to set a trap,
Marshall said slowly.
I want to bank the fire, I said, and let it do the work while they sleep. They think they've cooked my boy. I picked up my grandfather's apron off the back of the chair where I'd hung it, and I folded it over my arm. They forgot to ask who owns the pit. A good trap has to have bait a fool can't refuse, and it has to look like the fool's own idea to reach for it. Marshall and I sat at my kitchen table past midnight building it. Sullivan sat with us feeding us numbers. What we needed was something shiny, something that spoke the only language those two people understood, which was money they had not worked for. It has to be a sum, Sullivan said, big enough that greed overrides caution, but it has to come with strings that force them to put certain things in writing. That's the whole point. The bait is the money. The hook is the paperwork. Marshall took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Patrick, what have you got that they'd believe? It has to be real enough to survive a phone call and a quick look. I thought about it for a while, sitting there in the low light with my coffee going cold, the way it does with me now. Land, I said finally. My grandfather bought a piece of bottom land down near the river in the 50s, 40 acres, worthless for farming, floods every spring. Been sitting in the family, doing nothing for 70 years. It's real. It's got my name on the deed. Anybody can look it up at the county. I turned my cup in a slow circle. But here's the thing. There's been talk, real talk, about the highway coming through down there. If that road goes in, that worthless bottom land turns into a truck stop and a distribution center. Overnight, it's worth more than everything else I own. Sullivan's cold eyes came up. Is the highway real? The talk is real. The road is a maybe. I almost smiled. But greedy people don't hear maybe. They hear money. And Matthias fancies himself a real estate man. He'll hear it loudest of all. Marshall nodded slowly. So you offer to put the land in a trust for the grandchildren, and you tell them you're too old and broken to manage it, and you can't let Maxton near it because he grimaced, unwell. So you need a responsible family member to be the trustee. And the trustee will have to sign, I said, acknowledging in writing that Maxton is incompetent, and acknowledging their own control of family assets. And Marshall is going to write those clauses so that signing them is the same as signing a confession. I looked at him. Can you do that? Make a piece of paper that reads like a gift going in and a noose coming out. Marshall put his glasses back on. For the first time in 2 days, the old courtroom lawyer smiled. Patrick, I have been writing paper like that for 40 years. It's the only art I ever mastered. So that was the bait and that was the hook. But there was one more piece, and it was the hardest, and it was all mine to carry. I had to become the fool. I stood in front of the mirror in my bathroom the next morning, and I practiced. It is a strange thing at 70 years old to teach yourself to look weak. My whole life has been spent doing the opposite. My grandfather raised me to stand straight in a world that wanted men like us bent. I have stood straight at funerals and foreclosures and in the backs of rooms where I was the only face like mine, and I never once let them see me fold. Now I had to fold on purpose. I let my shoulders round. I let my hands develop a small tremble, which, God help me, did not take as much acting as it should have. I practiced a watery, faraway look, the look of a man whose fight has run out of him. I put on an old cardigan that smelled of the cedar chest and soft slippers instead of my boots. And I did not shave so the gray stubble came in patchy and made me look every one of my years and then some. And here is the part I did not tell Marshall. I did not have to reach very far to find that broken old man in the mirror. He was right there, just under the surface, closer than I liked. Some mornings lately, since Aaron, since all of it, I had woken up and felt exactly like that. Finished. Emptied out. Too old and too tired for the world. The trap only works if the lie has truth in it, and the truth was that a part of me really was the ruined thing I was pretending to be. I looked at that old man in the glass, and I was not entirely sure how much of him was costume. I pushed that thought down where I pushed the others down deep, with the grief and the anger and the long ache of missing my wife. There would be time to be tired when my family was safe. Time to be an old man then, if I still wanted to. But not yet. Not 1 minute before my son could sleep sound and my grandbaby could run across a yard without going gray in the lips.
The tired could wait. It had waited 70 years. It could wait a few more days. Maxton came to the bathroom door while I was buttoning that sorry cardigan. He'd been sleeping better. The fog was lifting from him a little more each day, and it near broke my heart to see the man he was supposed to be climbing back up out of the wreckage. He looked at me dressed like a beaten pensioner, and his face went tight with alarm. "Dad, what is this? Why are you dressed like?" "Because today I'm going to go see your wife," I said, "and I'm going to tell her I've given up, that I believe her, that you're sick and I'm too old to fight her, and I just want to make peace and provide for my grandbabies before I die." "You can't go over there. She'll call the police. She'll say you." "She's going to say a lot of things." I settled the cardigan on my shoulders and took one last look at the stranger in the mirror. Let her. Every word she says today, she's going to say into a microphone she doesn't know is running. "Son, I need you to trust me. I know exactly what I'm doing." He studied me a long moment. Then quietly he said, "You're not really giving up." I put my hand on the back of his neck the way I used to when he was small. "Boy," I said, "I have never given up on a single thing in 70 years. I'm not about to start with you." I picked up the leather folder that held Marshall's beautiful, deadly paperwork, and I tucked it under my arm. "Now, how do I look?" He swallowed. "You look like somebody who lost everything." "Good," I said. "Then it's working." I drove out to Cedar Lane with my back bent and my hands trembling, and a folder full of ruin on the seat beside me, going 10 miles under the limit the whole way. An old man in no hurry at all. Low and slow. That's the secret. That was always the secret. It was time to go feed the fools. The house on Cedar Lane was the kind of place that costs a lot and holds nothing. All white walls and cold marble, and not one thing on the shelves that a hand had made. It was the house my son's stolen money helped pay for, and I made myself shuffle into it, slow, cardigan, buttoned wrong hat, literally in my hands. Anaya opened the door herself. She was beautiful the way a knife is beautiful. She took one look at me bent and gray and beaten, and I watched something ease in her face. Relief, contempt. She thought the last threat to her had just arrived at her door with his hat in his hands to surrender. "Mr. Montoya," she said, warm as poured honey. "I wasn't expecting you. Is everything as Maxton all right?" She even managed to make her eyes go soft with fake worry. She was good. I will give the devil that. She was very, very good. "Can I sit down, Anaya?" I let my voice shake. "My knees. I drove a long way. I need to talk. As family." Matthias was there too, lounging on a white sofa in a sweater that cost more than it should. A watch on his wrist that I could tell from across the room was pretending to be something it wasn't. He didn't get up. He looked at me the way a man looks at furniture he's thinking about throwing out. They sat me at the dining table. The dining table. I put my folded hands on the wood, and I thought about what had been done to my boy across a table just like this one. And I kept my face slack and my eyes wet, and I did not let one single thing show. "I've been doing a lot of praying," I said, "and a lot of thinking, and I have to tell you both I was angry. When I found Maxton, I was so angry, but I watched those videos, Anaya, the ones you sent to Marshall. I let my voice crack right down the middle, and it was not entirely acting, because the videos were real, even if the reason was a lie. That's not my son. That's not the boy I raised. You were right. He's sick. He's real sick, and I'm an old man, and I can't fix him. I don't have the fight in me anymore. Not since Aaron." Anaya reached across and patted my hand. Her fingers were cold. "I know how hard this is. I've been carrying it alone for so long. I nearly came out of my skin." I held still. "I don't want to fight you," I said. "I want to make peace, and I want to provide for my grandbabies before the Lord calls me home. That's why I came." I reached into the leather folder with a trembling hand and drew out the deed and the surveyor's map. "I've got some land, down by the river. 40 acres. It's been in the family since my grandfather. Worthless bottomland floods every year. But I let a little life come into my voice, an old man clutching at one last hope. There's talk of the new highway coming through. If it does, that land's worth better than $500,000. And I want it to go to Leo and to Nyla. To my grandbaby. In a trust, where he can't get at it. I saw it happen. I saw the greed light them both up like a struck match. Matthias was off the sofa and at the table before Anaya could speak. $500,000, he said, picking up the survey, turning it over, playing at expertise. Which corridor, the 59 bypass or the East Loop? East Loop, I said. That was the true one. Sullivan had briefed me cold. Matthias's eyes narrowed. And here it came. The one I'd been warned about. The smart one. The careful one. He set the paper down slow. That's a lot of money to just hand over, Mr. Montoya. And frankly, you show up here dressed like you slept in a ditch, telling us a fairy tale about a highway. He pulled out his phone. I think I'll just call the county assessor and the highway commission myself before anybody signs anything. Verify the whole thing. You don't mind, do you? The room went very still. This was the knife's edge. If he made that call cold on his own terms, the whole thing could come apart. I did not panic. Panic is heat, and I had banked my fire. I just looked up at him, tired and mild. An old fool who did not understand why anyone would doubt him. Of course I don't mind, son, I said. Call Del Rayford over at the county. He's handled my land since 1980. Tell him Patrick sent you. I gave him the number from memory. It was real. Del was real. And Del was a deacon at my church who would have walked through fire for me, and who, when a stranger called asking about Montoya Bottomland and the East Loop, would tell him God's honest truth that yes, that land was mine free and clear, and yes, there was serious talk of the highway. Every word true. That is the beauty of a good trap. You build most of it out of the truth. Matthias made the call. I watched his face change as Del confirmed it all, watched the suspicion melt into hunger. He hung up and gave his sister a small nod. And just like that, the last door in their minds swung open. Well, Anaya said, and the honey was back. That's so generous, Mr. Montoya. There's just one thing. I fumbled the papers out. My lawyer says I can't cut Maxton out clean unless family agrees he can't manage money. Otherwise, he could sue, break the trust, spend it all on his sickness. So there's a form. It says we all agree he's not competent, and it names one of you as trustee in control. I need that or the whole gift falls apart. I slid Marshall's beautiful, deadly paper across the table. I just want the babies protected. Anaya picked it up. She read it. She was smarter than her brother, and for one bad second, her eyes lingered on a clause. But greed is a fog thicker than any drug. She saw $500,000 and an old man begging to give it away. And she did not see the noose stitched into the language. She picked up the pen, and as she signed her name, she could not help herself. They never can. You know, she said almost kindly, almost gloating, if you just believed me 2 years ago, none of the ugliness would have been necessary. Maxton was always weak, Mr. Montoya, just like his father. I did what I had to do to protect this family's future. Somebody in this family had to be strong enough to make the hard choices. She signed with a flourish. Matthias signed under her. I only ever managed the situation. Managed. Into a running recorder in my breast pocket, she called poisoning my son, managing the situation. She called it a hard choice somebody had to make. I took the signed paper back in my trembling hands, and I folded it away next to that little recorder that had heard every golden word. Thank you, I whispered. You don't know what this means to me. I stood up, slow, groaning the beaten old man to the very last. They walked me to the door, pleased with themselves, already spending money that would never come. But at the door, with my back to them, I let the mask slip just for me. I let my spine come up straight. I felt my grandfather's steel run back down through it, vertebra by vertebra. And I smiled where they could not see it, low and slow. The fools had taken the bait clean off the hook and swallowed it whole, and thanked me for the meal. Now all I had to do was let it cook overnight. Come morning, they'd be done clean through. Family court smells like floor wax and other people's worst days. Thursday morning, I put on my good charcoal suit, the one I wear to funerals, and I sat in the second row behind my son, and I folded my hands, and I waited. Maxton sat beside Marshall at the table on the left. He wore a suit too. He was steadier than he had been, 3 days of clean food and clean water in him, the fog lifting. But his hands still trembled when he poured water from the pitcher, and I knew the judge would see that tremble, and I knew what she would think it meant. Across the aisle sat Anaya. She had dressed for the part with a genius I had to respect, even as it turned my stomach. A modest gray dress buttoned to the throat, no jewelry, her hair pulled back plain, a tissue balled in one hand that she touched to dry eyes at all the right moments. Beside her sat her lawyer, Guillermo Cummings, a smooth man in a suit that shone a little too much. The kind of man who bills by the tier. The judge was a woman named Salem Ellison. She had a face like weathered stone and eyes that had plainly been lied to 10,000 times and remembered every one. When she looked out over that courtroom, I had the feeling she could see through walls. "This is a petition for emergency guardianship and temporary custody," Judge Ellison said. "Mr. Cummings, you filed on an emergency basis. Show me the emergency." Cummings rose smooth as oil. "Gladly, Your Honor. What we have here is a tragedy. Mr. Maxton Escobar, a once capable man, has suffered a rapid and catastrophic mental decline. His wife has watched helpless as the father of her children became a stranger, a danger. He touched a laptop and the screen on the wall came alive. I must warn the court, this is difficult to watch." And then he played the videos. There was my son on that wall, 10 feet tall, screaming at nothing, sweeping dishes off a counter, weeping on a kitchen floor, curled up like a child, saying things that made no sense. Anaya's voice, off camera, trembling, gentle, terrified. "Baby, please, you're scaring me. Please calm down." On and on, clip after clip. A whole 2-year library of a man's worst moments torn out of context, with the woman who caused every one of them narrating like a saint. I made myself watch. It was the hardest thing I did in all of it. Harder than the burnt brisket, harder than the cardigan. Because I knew the truth, and it still looked like madness. I understood sitting there exactly how they had almost won. If I did not know about the coffee, the special plates, the amber bottle, I would have believed it too. God forgive me. I might have signed the papers myself. Beside me, I heard a woman 2 rows back start to cry, moved by the performance. I looked at the judge. Her stone face gave away nothing. "Your Honor," Cummings said, closing the laptop, soft, respectful, like a man closing a casket. "There is more. This past week, Mr. Escobar removed his own child from the family home during a psychotic episode. And when my client's family attempted to intervene for the child's safety, her father-in-law, Mr. Patrick Montoya, became involved. He turned and he looked right at me, and I saw the trap in his eyes a half-second before it closed. Your Honor, we have a sworn statement that 3 days ago, Patrick Montoya forced his way into my client's home, threatened her in front of witnesses, and said, and I quote, that he would burn her whole world down. We have every reason to believe these 2 men, father and son, acting together, pose an ongoing danger." The courtroom stirred. Judge Ellison's stone eyes turned and settled on me, and for the first time, they held something cold. It was a lie. I had never set foot in that house until yesterday, in a cardigan, with my hat in my hands. But it was a beautiful lie, because it took the true thing, my rage, my promise to take it all back, and dressed it up in a threat I never made. And the worst of it, it was my word against a sworn statement, and I was the angry old man, and my son was the one shaking on the 10-foot screen. I felt the whole thing tilt. I felt the floor of my careful plans shift under me. This was the moment they had built to. Get the judge looking at the Montoya men as a pair of dangerous, unstable people, and every piece of evidence we brought would look like the desperate lashing out of exactly the men they'd described. Anaya lifted her tissue to her eye, but over the top of it, just for a flicker, she looked back at me, and she let me see it. The small, private smile of a woman who believes she has already won. She thought I was still the broken man from her dining room. She had built this whole ambush on the belief that Patrick Montoya was finished. That was her mistake. But right then in that moment, it did not feel like a mistake. It felt like a noose. I sat still as a fence post, and I did not let one thing move in my face. But inside, I was doing the hardest arithmetic of my life. One wrong word from me now, one flash of the temper they'd sworn I had, and I would hand them the very picture they needed. I could lose my boy in this room this morning to a lie about a threat I never made. My hands wanted to become fists. I laid them flat on my knees, and I made them stay. Low and slow. Not yet. Not 1 second early. Judge Ellison set down her pen. Mr. Cummings, if what you say is true, this is serious. Mr. Montoya, I may have questions for you before we're through. She let that sit on me a moment, heavy. Then she turned. Mr. McKay, your client is asking me to look at 2 years of documented crisis and a family in fear. What exactly do you intend to say in response? I watched Marshall rise. He did not hurry. At 30 years in courtrooms, hurry had been trained out of him. He buttoned his jacket 1 button slow, and when he spoke, his voice was so calm it made the whole room lean in. Your Honor, Marshall said, we do not dispute that the man in those videos was out of his mind. A murmur ran through the gallery. Cummings blinked, caught off guard. Anaya's head came up. We do not dispute a single frame of it, Marshall went on. We agree completely. On the day those videos were taken, Maxton Escobar was not in his right mind. He let the silence stretch until it ached. We simply intend to prove why, and I'd ask the court to reserve its questions for my client's father until after it has seen what we found in that young man's blood, and in his hair, and in an amber pill bottle recovered from his truck. He turned at last toward Anaya, and his voice never rose, and that was what made it terrible. Because this was never a case about a sick man, Your Honor. It's a case about a poisoned one. Marshall called Diana Gill to the stand first. She walked up in a plain dark suit, took the oath, and laid a folder square on the rail in front of her. She did not look nervous. People who deal in facts rarely do. Dr. Gill, Marshall said, you examined Maxton Escobar 2 days ago. Blood, urine, and a hair sample. What did you find? I found haloperidol, she said. Her voice carried to every corner of that quiet room. A powerful antipsychotic, in a man with no prescription for it and no psychiatric history to justify one. What does haloperidol do to a healthy person? In the doses I measured, it disables them. Confusion, hallucinations, tremors, memory loss, emotional outbursts followed by collapse. She looked up and her eyes found Anaya without heat, the way a scale finds true weight. In a healthy man, it does not treat psychosis. It manufactures the appearance of it. Everything on that screen a moment ago is a textbook presentation of haloperidol intoxication. Cummings shot up. Objection. The witness cannot know how it entered his system. I can tell you when. Diana said before the judge ruled, and Ellison let her go on. Hair is a timeline, Your Honor. It grows at a known rate, and it locks in whatever is in the blood month by month, like rings in a tree. I sectioned this young man's hair. The haloperidol begins precisely 26 months ago, and it never stops. Someone dosed this man steadily for over 2 years. She closed her folder. The empty bottle recovered from his truck bore a scraped label. What survived reads haloperidol. It matches, and it fit. It fit the empty bottle under his truck seat with the scraped label. It fit the special plates Cameron was never allowed to fix. It fit a 6-year-old small voice reciting a rule at my kitchen table. Don't eat what Mama cooks for Daddy, it'll make me sleepy. Every ugly piece of it clicked together into one whole terrible truth. I watched my son's face as she said it. I watched 2 years of doubt fall off him like a coat too heavy to wear. He had spent all that time believing his own mind had betrayed him. And a woman with a folder and a lock of his hair had just stood up in front of God and the county and said no. You were never broken. Something was done to you. Maxton put a hand over his mouth. His shoulders shook. He was not weeping from grief now. He was weeping from the other thing. The thing that comes when a weight you have carried so long you forgot its name is finally lifted off your back. That right there, that was what I came for. Not the verdict, not the land, not the money, not even seeing that woman answer for what she did. That. My boy handed back to himself. For 2 years he had gone to sleep every night believing he was losing his mind, believing he was a danger to his own babies. And every morning that belief had been a lie. Somebody spooned into his coffee. And now, in a room full of strangers, science had reached out and taken his sanity out of her hands and put it back into his. I would have paid every dollar I had for that one moment. As it turned out, I nearly did. But Marshall was not finished. He was just getting to the heart of the fire. "The defense suggests my client's illness came on suddenly this past November," Marshall said. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter one more document." He crossed the floor and handed it up. "It is a purchase agreement. It sells Montoya's Pit, the restaurant, the property, the recipes to a corporate buyer. It is signed by Anaya Escobar and her brother, Matthias Davila." He paused. "It is dated the 14th of September, 2 full months before Mr. Escobar's alleged illness began. 2 months before the first video, before the first doctor's note, before any of it."
The room went dead still.
"They did not sell the business because he got sick," Marshall said, quiet and merciless. "They made him sick because they had already sold the business and they needed the rightful owner declared incompetent before the sale came to light. The poisoning was not a symptom of anything, Your Honor. It was a cover-up. The dates cannot be argued with. You cannot drug a man to hide a theft you have not yet committed." Cummings was on his feet, saying words, but they had no weight anymore. The air had gone out of his case. And then Anaya broke. She stood up so fast her chair scraped. The tissue was gone. The soft, grieving wife was gone. What was left was the thing underneath, and it was not sorry, and that was the part that chilled the room to the bone. "You don't understand what it's like," she said, and her voice shook, but not with guilt, with the terrible certainty of someone who truly believes her own gospel. "I watched my own father give everything away, being soft, being kind. I watched my mother beg. I swore I would never be that. Maxton was going to run that business into the ground with his big, trusting heart, and I was the only one strong enough to protect this family's future." She was breathing hard. "I did what had to be done. Somebody had to be the one to make the hard choice. I protected my children." "You canceled your daughter's heart appointments 3 times to pay for a party," I said. I had not meant to speak. It came out of me low and flat from the second row, and the whole room turned. Anaya looked at me, and for 1 second, one only, something flickered behind her eyes that might have been the ghost of a human being. Then it closed over, and she looked away, and she said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would not damn her further. Judge Ellison let the silence hang. Then she set down her pen with a click that sounded like a gavel. "The petition for guardianship is denied," she said, "with prejudice. The petition for custody is denied. I am vacating the restraining order against Maxton Escobar and issuing an emergency order removing the minor child from the care of Anaya Escobar." Her stone eyes turned to Anaya, and now there was heat in them, banked and terrible. "And I am referring this entire matter to the district attorney for immediate criminal investigation. Poisoning, fraud, child endangerment. Mrs. Escobar, you should retain a very different kind of lawyer than the one beside you." Cummings was already gathering his papers, putting distance between himself and his client, the way a man steps back from a fire. But Anaya was not looking at the judge anymore. She was looking at me, and she began to laugh. It was a broken, ugly sound. "Fine," she said. "You proved I did it. Congratulations, old man. But you're too late for the part that matters." She leaned toward me across the aisle, and her smile was all teeth. "The money's already gone, spent, and tonight the whole county's coming to my launch. My brand goes live in 6 hours, whether you like it or not. You can't stop that. You can win in this little room and still watch me walk out that door and land on my feet." She straightened her ruined dress. "So enjoy your verdict. It didn't get you a dime." I stood up, slow. And for the first time in that courtroom, I let her see me stand all the way straight. "Anaya," I said, "I'll see you tonight at your party." We did not go home to celebrate. Celebration is for when the job is done, and the job was only half done. Winning in that courtroom got my son his name back. It did not get my family back $1 of what those people stole. And a man who quits at half done is a man who leaves the fire unbanked to go out in the night.
So we went to work.
Sullivan had spent the morning while I was in court on the telephone, and by the time we gathered in Marshall's office, he had it laid out clean. He tapped the whiteboard. "Here's the thing about that lake house," he said. "They put $200,000 of stolen money down and financed the rest through a small regional lender, Cascade Bank, and to get that loan, they lied. Fabricated income. Fake employer. It's fraud and the bank doesn't know it yet." He looked at me. "Banks hate fraud, Mr. Montoya. It's a loss on their books and a headache with the regulators. So this morning I called Cascade and told them quietly
That their loan on the Caddo Lake House was built on falsified documents.
and I offered them a way out. My client's holding company will buy that note. Today. Cash. Take the bad paper off their hands, no loss, no headache."
And they said, I asked.
They said yes before I finished the sentence. Sullivan slid a folder across the desk to me. "As of 2 o'clock this afternoon, a company owned entirely by you holds the mortgage on that lake house. You are their bank now, and because they committed fraud to get the loan, you don't have to wait for a missed payment. There's a clause. Fraud in the application lets the lender call the whole balance due immediately." He almost smiled. It was a terrible thing on his gray face. "You can demand every dollar back whenever you like. They owe it to you, all of it." I turned the folder over in my hands, and something old and quiet moved in my chest. My grandfather bought a shovel because no bank in this county would lend a black man a dime. Not for a business, not for a home, not for anything. He built what he built with no bank behind him at all. And now, 3 generations on, his grandson sat holding the note on a house those people had built out of my family's stolen blood. I had become the bank that his grandfather was denied. There is a kind of justice that runs in a long, slow circle, like that longer than one man's life, and I have learned not to question it when it finally comes around. I only bow my head and give thanks. "There's more," Marshall said. "The inventory. All those yoga mats and vitamins and silk robes she bought for tonight, she bought them with the last of the stolen cash. That makes them proceeds of a crime. We can seize them, and it happens they are all sitting in one room tonight." He looked at me. "The Riverside Hall. You know it." I knew it. I had cooked the grand opening barbecue for the Riverside Hall 11 years back when Odell Pruitt built it. And Odell still tells anybody who'll listen that my brisket is the reason his wife married him. I picked up the phone and I called Odell, and I did not have to say much. When a man hears that the woman renting his hall poisoned her husband and abandoned a sick child, and that her party is being paid for with stolen money, he does not need convincing. He needs a side door left unlocked and a favor called even. By 7 o'clock that evening, everything was in place. Sullivan had the paperwork. Marshall had the seizure order, signed by a judge who had read the day's court record and moved fast. And I had a flash drive in my breast pocket, right where the recorder had ridden the day before. On that drive was everything: the bank statements, the September contract, and a recording of a woman at her dining table in her own voice calling the poisoning of my son, managing the situation. I put on the black suit, the good one, the one that fits me like armor. I did not bend my back this time. I did not shuffle. Those days were done. Maxton came with me. So did Marshall. 3 men in dark suits. The Riverside Hall glowed like a jewelry box that night. They had done it up in soft pink light and white flowers, and everywhere you looked, there was that logo, a gold letter over a lotus flower, the Anaya method. It was stamped on the water bottles and printed on the banners and embroidered on robes displayed on little stands like holy relics. The room was full of well-dressed people holding champagne, influencers angling their phones for the light. The whole county's appetite for a good story gathered under one roof. And up on the stage, in a spotlight, in a white suit that probably cost more than my truck, stood Anaya. She was radiant. She was luminous. She was lying with every inch of herself, and the room was eating it up. "People see the brand," she was saying, her voice trembling with practiced feeling. "And they think it came easy. They don't see the nights I spent on the bathroom floor. They don't see what it costs to love someone through a sickness that turns them into a stranger." She pressed a hand to her heart. I lost so much, but I learned that a woman can lose everything and still rise. That's what this is. My promise to you that no matter what breaks you, you can build something beautiful from the pieces. The room burst into applause. People stood. They were cheering for the woman who canceled a child's heart doctor to pay for the very lights she stood under. I looked at Maxton. His jaw was set, but his eyes were steady. He was not the broken man in those videos. He stood tall in his suit and watched his wife sell his suffering to a cheering crowd, and he did not waver.
"You ready, son?" I asked him quiet.
"She turned what she did to me into a brand," he said, "into a product." His voice was low and even. "Every person clapping in here right now is clapping for the worst thing that ever happened to me. She's up there selling my 2 lost years like they were a candle or a jar of face cream." He drew a breath. "I spent so long ashamed of being sick. Turns out, I was never the one who should have been ashamed." He looked at me. "I'm ready, Dad."
I looked toward the back of the hall to the sound booth, where Odell Pruitt stood with his arms crossed waiting on my signal. I gave him a small nod. Then I stepped out of the shadows by the side door into the pink light, and I started walking down the center aisle toward the stage. Not fast, not slow. Just steady, the way you walk toward a fire you finally know how to put out. Heads began to turn. Anaya saw me when I was halfway down the aisle. Her voice caught mid-sentence. The champagne glasses stopped clinking. A wave of quiet spread out from the stage as the crowd followed her stare and found 3 men in dark suits walking toward the light. "Security," she said into the microphone, and her voice climbed high and thin. "Please remove these men. That's my father-in-law. He's been stalking me. He's dangerous." 2 big men in black shirts started moving toward us from the walls. I did not slow down. I reached into my jacket and held up the flash drive, and I turned toward the sound booth at the back of the room. "Odell!" I called out loud enough to carry over the music. "Play it!" Odell Pruitt did not hesitate. He cut Anaya's microphone dead. Then the big screen behind her, the one that had been showing her serene face over a mountain range, flickered and changed. A bank statement bloomed across it 10 feet tall. A transfer of $200,000. Then the September contract, her signature and her brother's plain, for every soul in that room to read. Dated 2 months before her husband ever got sick. The crowd began to murmur then, to gasp, the sound rolling through them like wind through the pines. And then Odell played the recording. Her own voice filled the hall crystal clear through those big speakers she had rented to launch her lie. "If you'd just believed me 2 years ago, none of the ugliness would have been necessary. Maxton was always weak. I did what I had to do. Somebody had to be strong enough to make the hard choices. I only ever managed the situation." The word managed hung in that beautiful pink room like a bad smell. Managed. Everyone there had just watched her weep about loving a sick man through his darkest hour. Now they heard her in her own voice call it management. I watched it land on the crowd. I watched the sympathy curdle on their faces table by table as they understood what they had been clapping for. A woman near the front set down her champagne like it had turned to poison in her hand. The influencers stopped filming Anaya's tears and started filming her ruin. The whole warm, adoring room turned cold in the space of 10 seconds, the way a crowd does when it realizes it has been made a fool of. Anaya stood frozen in her spotlight. The microphone hung dead in her hand. I climbed the 2 steps to the stage. My knees complained, but I did not let them show it. I stood beside her, and I did not shout, because I have learned a man does not need to shout to be heard. "She told you she built this from nothing," I said. And the room was so quiet, my voice reached the back wall on its own. "She told you she survived a sick husband. That man is not sick. He was poisoned. For 2 years by his own wife, so she could sell everything his family built and blame it on his mind." I looked out at all those faces, all those phones. My son is standing right there. Look at him. He's not the monster in her videos. He's the man she nearly destroyed to pay for this party. Every phone in the room turned toward Maxton, and my son did not flinch from them. He stood straight in the pink light and let them see him whole. Matthias came shoving up onto the stage, his face gone the color of raw meat. "This is slander," he sputtered. "You can't just do you know what. This is worth." "I know exactly what it's worth," I said.
I bought the note on your lake house this afternoon, Matthias. I own the roof over your head now. And since you lied on the loan to get it, I can call every dollar due tonight." I turned back to the room. The vitamins, the mats, all of it, bought with stolen money, which makes them stolen goods. I nodded toward the side doors. They opened. A team in gray coveralls came in with red tape and hand trucks, moving with the calm of men who do this for a living, and they began sealing the displays, tagging the boxes, stripping the Anaya method out of that room in real time, while its founder stood on stage with a dead microphone and watched her castle carried out the door. Anaya turned on me. The last mask was gone. What was left was not even angry. It was emptied out hollow, a person looking at the end of the only story she knew how to tell about herself. "You've ruined everything," she whispered. "You're a monster." The doors at the back opened again. This time, it was not the seizure crew. 2 detectives in plain suits came down the aisle, and they were not looking at me. They walked up onto the stage, and the older one took out a pair of handcuffs. "Anaya Escobar," he said, "you're under arrest, poisoning, fraud, child endangerment." The cuffs clicked. Across the stage, another officer was reciting the same words to Matthias, who had stopped sputtering and gone very pale and very quiet. As they turned Anaya toward the aisle, she looked one last time at Maxton. I stepped closer to my son, ready. All through this, I had been afraid of this exact moment, afraid that some old trained instinct would flicker in him, the pull she had used on him for years, and that he would waver. He did not waver. He looked at the woman he had married, being led away in handcuffs past a room full of strangers, and his face held no anger and no grief. It held nothing at all. He looked at her the way you look at a stranger on the evening news who has done something terrible in a town you will never visit. The cord was cut. Whatever she had wrapped around him for all those years had finally cleanly fallen away. He turned his head and he looked back at me instead, and that was answer enough. They took her out the door and it swung shut, and the pink room let out its held breath. And in that noise, in that whole roaring crowd of applause and gasps and cameras, I felt none of the triumph I had thought I would feel. I stood on that stage and looked at the wreckage of it, the sealed boxes, the flashing lights out the windows, and what rose up in me was not victory, it was Aaron. It was 2 years of my son's life that no verdict could give back. It was everything this had cost that could never be uncosted. I did not say any of it. I let the crowd have their ending. I let my boy have his freedom. I stood there in the light, an old man who had won, and I let the tired come up into me at last, just for a moment, before I pushed it back down. My grandfather used to say that a man who builds knows the difference between tearing down and clearing ground. Tearing down is for spite. Clearing ground is for what comes after. Standing there in the wreckage of that party, I understood I had not come to destroy that woman. I had come to clear the ground so my son could build a life on it again. That was the only vengeance worth having, and it did not feel like vengeance at all. It felt like the end of a very long night's work. Then I put my hand on my son's shoulder. "Come on," I said, "let's go home." 3 months passed, the way they do, one slow sunrise at a time. The law moved slower than I wanted, and faster than those people deserved. In the end, there was no trial. When the district attorney laid out the hair analysis, the September contract, and that recording playing in a room full of witnesses, there was nothing left to argue. Anaya took a plea to avoid a jury and got 7 years. Matthias got 5 on the fraud, and the holistic doctor who had written the phony letters and helped source the haloperidol lost his license and got 2. The corporate buyers, once they learned the sale had been signed by a woman with no legal right to sell and covered up with a felony, backed out so fast they left rubber on the road. The Anaya method was dissolved. Its assets were liquidated to pay its creditors, and the largest creditor, as it turned out, was an old pitmaster from Marshall, Texas. Between the note on the lake house and the seized inventory and the unwound sale, near about every dollar came home. Not all of it. Lawyers and doctors and forensic accountants do not work for thanks. But enough. More than enough. I drove up to Caddo once before we sold that lake house on. I stood on the dock they'd built with my family's money and looked out at the water, and I did not feel a thing I'd expected to feel. No triumph, no sweetness. Just the flat gray understanding that people will trade anything at all, their own child's heartbeat included, for a view they think will make them somebody. I did not stay long. That water had nothing to say to me. I sold the house to a young family from Longview. Good people. 2 kids and I let it go for a fair price and did not look back. And Aaron's gold came home too. I had my lawyer pull that recipe out of the collateral and put it back where it belonged in the name of the family that made it. The day the papers cleared, I drove to the county office myself to sign, and my hand shook a little holding the pen, and it was not from age. But the sweetest thing I got back had nothing to do with money. Nyla saw the heart doctor. Turned out the murmur was a thing they could fix, a small thing if you caught it in time. We caught it in time, barely. 3 months later, that child ran across my backyard chasing a barn cat and did not have to sit down, did not go gray in the lips, just ran and hollered and lived the way a 6-year-old is supposed to. I sat on my porch and watched her run, and I had to look away for a minute so nobody would see my face. Maxton got steadier every week. The fog was gone. The man I raised came all the way back up out of the wreckage, and he was good. He was so good, and I thanked God for it every morning. He got his daughter back for good and for keeps. The court gave him full custody, and he did not miss a single one of Nyla's cardiology appointments after that. Not one, and he wrote each one down in that leather notebook of his in his mother's careful hand. I would catch him checking that notebook 3-4 times a day, making sure. A man who has had his own memory stolen does not take chances with the things that matter. I understood that. I did the same with the people I love now. But I will tell you the truth because I have not lied to you yet, and I will not start at the end. He did not come back all the way, not quite. There are holes in him now that will not fill. Whole stretches of those 2 years are just gone, burned out of him, and they are not coming back. Sometimes he'll stand in the kitchen of the restaurant he has cooked in his whole life and forget the name of a cut of meat, and I'll watch a flicker of the old fear cross his face, and I'll say it for him. Easy, like it's nothing, and we move on. That is a wound that will not fully heal. He carries it. I carry it with him. I have learned that you can love a person all the way, even when a part of them is missing. Because I learned it already in a house that has been missing Aaron for 2 years now, and is still, somehow, a home. When the restaurant came clear of all the liens and the lawyers, I did not just hand it to my son. I have watched what handouts do to a family. I watched a woman use money as a leash, and I will not repeat that sin in a kinder coat. So I sat Maxton down at my kitchen table, the same table where he'd confessed his nightmare 3 months before, and I slid a paper across to him. It was a sale agreement, fair price, fair terms, a real interest rate. He looked at it a long time. "Dad," he said, "you could just give it to me." "I could," I said, "but I'm not going to. You're going to buy it from me, son. Honest, over time, with your own 2 hands and your own work. Because a thing you earn is a thing nobody can ever tell you that you didn't deserve." I tapped the paper. "And because the deed's going to have your name on it, and only yours. No trusts, no partners, no family you have to trust with the keys to your own life. You. The way my grandfather did it, the way I did it." He read the terms again slowly, the way I taught him to read anything with his name at the bottom. And when he looked up, there was something in his eyes I had been waiting 3 months to see. Not gratitude, better than gratitude. There was pride. The clean, quiet pride of a man standing on his own 2 feet in his own life, holding his own future in his own hands. That was the thing they had tried hardest to steal from him, not the money, that. And here it was, come back into his eyes at my kitchen table, and worth more than the restaurant and the land and every dollar put together. "I'll pay you back," he said, "every dollar." "I know you will," I said. "You're a Montoya." He signed it. Then he did not shake my hand. He stood up and he put his arms around me, this grown man, my son come all the way back from the dead, and I held on to him there in that kitchen for a long time, and neither of us said anything, because some things are too big for words, and a man is a fool to try. Spring came on soft that year. The dogwoods bloomed out past the fence line. The restaurant reopened, and the whole town came the way they always have. 3 generations of them, to sit at Montoya tables and eat food cooked low and slow by hands that would not quit. And one evening near closing, with the light going gold through the front windows and Nyla coloring at the corner table and Maxton wiping down the counter, I went into the pantry and I took down a tin I had not opened in 2 years. Inside was a recipe card, 3/4 written in my wife's own hand. I carried that card out to the kitchen and I laid it on the steel counter under the warm light, the way you lay down something holy. Erin's slanted hand. The little heart she always drew over the I in her name. A smudge of paprika in the corner where her thumb once rested. And 3 lines from the bottom where she'd set down her pen to answer a phone that would change everything. The ink simply stops. For 2 years I had not been able to look at that unfinished line. It was the last thing my wife ever wrote, and finishing it felt like admitting she was gone. But that evening, I called my son over, and I called my granddaughter up onto a stool beside me. And the 3 of us Montoya hands, old and grown and small, finished Erin's gold together. Nyla read the last measured line out in her careful 6-year-old voice. Maxton wrote it down in his mother's recipe in his own steady hand. And I stirred the pot low and slow, the way it has always been done. For 50 years, I believed my grandfather's gospel without question. Low and slow. Good things cannot be rushed. Patience is a kind of strength. And it is. I will go to my grave believing that a thing worth having is worth waiting for. But I learned something out past the last streetlight this year, something the old man never got the chance to teach me. Patience is a strength only when it is serving something. Wait on a brisket, wait on a season, wait on a stubborn heart to soften, yes, but do not wait while the wolves are at the door. Do not call it patience when it is only fear wearing patience like a borrowed coat. There is a time to bank the fire low and let the years do their slow work. And there is a time to throw open the vents and let it roar. The wisdom, the whole of it, is knowing which hour you are standing in. I had waited too long once with Erin, and it cost me everything. I very nearly did it again. The difference between the man who loses everyone and the man who saves his family is sometimes just one choice made one day sooner. I think about that woman sometimes sitting in her cell. I do not hate her the way I did. She was so busy protecting herself from ever being weak that she became the very thing she feared, and she raised her hand against a child to do it. God have mercy on her, because I have none left to spare. And I think about my own people, my grandfather with his borrowed shovel, my father, all of them who stood in a world that gave them nothing and chose every single time to build instead of to take. That is the inheritance, not the restaurant, not the recipe, the choice. When the world wounds you, and it will, you can let that wound turn you hard and grasping and cruel, or you can let it turn you into someone who protects. God set that fork in the road in front of every one of us. God knows which way most of us are tempted to go, but the measure of a life is which road you take while your family is watching. So here is what I want to ask you tonight, from my kitchen to wherever you are listening. If it were your family, your child, your blood being taken from you, one quiet day at a time by someone you trusted, someone you loved, someone sitting right across your own dinner table, could you do what I did? Could you hold your fire long enough to be sure, and then, when the hour finally came, let it burn clean and true? Or would you wait one day too long, the way I almost did, the way so many of us do, telling ourselves there is no rush, that it will keep that patience is always the wiser road? I don't know your answer. I only know mine, learned late and paid for dear. If this story touched something in you, if it put you in mind of your own family, your own hard choices, tell me about it in the comments. I read them. Tell me who you were fighting for and whether you got there in time. And if you believe the way I have come to believe, that the people we love are worth both our patience and our fire, then stay a while. Follow along. There are more stories to tell, and I will keep telling them, low and slow, for as long as the good Lord lets me stand at the pit. That night, we ate together, all 3 of us at one table for the first time in 2 years. Erin's gold on every plate, and I tell you, it tasted like she was home.